5. All right, so I'm going to call the October 10th meeting of the Legislative Committee to order. So roll call, so Mark Davies, I'm here. Dave Risberger.
Here.
Kayla Parry-Shu.
I'm here.
And Ed Overby.
Here.
All right, so everyone's here. Did anybody have a chance to look over the minutes? And
Yes, they look good to me.
great. Excellent. So we'll approve the minutes. Public comment. Anyone here to make a public comment? No? All right. Then our first topic of business, if you will, is the Code Chapter 300-58, walls and fences. Stephen, if you could walk us through that, it'd be helpful.
So the first thing in the packet is the current section on fencing, which is this.
A little lackluster.
This wall and fence section was adopted as part of the MU1 ordinance. The only thing that is really changed, so what happened is the MU1 code has like material requirements, it has like design requirements. It doesn't allow for chain link fencing, except in CI zones. It's more descriptive on like material requirements. It clears up a couple sections. If you look at the image on this page, there's always been kind of a, can you build a fence in the side yard up to the front as long as it's behind the porch or not? So this code kind of clarifies that by saying, this is a backyard, this is a side yard. We don't want you putting a 7-foot fence essentially in a front, corner lot. So really, there's not a ton of changes to the existing fence code in the MU1 section. There would be changes as far as like material requirements. If you look at like the material requirement list, there's like, we talked about this at the last meeting. Fences and walls should be constructed with permanent, durable materials which are appropriate and complementary to the existing built environment. These should be limited to brick, stone, concrete, properly weathered or protected finished wood, iron, steel, vinyl, composite material. So it lists a bunch of, it kind of outlines what materials we would want as fencing. It gives the planning commission the ability to review materials that aren't necessarily listed. So if someone comes up with some really crazy fence design that isn't made out of one of those materials, they could theoretically go to the planning commission and say, hey, we think we meet the intent of the code, but we're not technically building a fence out of that list of material. The old fence code prohibited some materials like barbed wire, like electrically charged fencing. It had a whole list of stuff. Those stayed. The only thing that was added to that was chain link. That's one of those things that like many communities have moved away from allowing chain link fences in residential neighborhoods, basically because it's aesthetically not attractive. So we still would allow chain link fence in like CI zones for commercial uses, but we would say, we don't have a lot of chain link fences in the city. Let's not add any new ones, just because it's cheap. That's kind of the. And then the height section, that was kind of where you guys had the thing with the screening. So if you look, it says fences and walls should be measured from the average ground level. An additional 1 foot of height may be added to any fence to accommodate posts, columns, light fixtures, or decorative details. Blah, blah, blah. Fences located in rear lawns, not adjacent to a public right of way, may include screening within this additional foot. However, the screening element shall be constructed so that more than 50% of the screening surface is basically see-through. So you're saying that like lattice, some sort of material that isn't obstruction, like it's not obstructing. So you would gain, on a 6-foot panel, you would gain another foot of permitted fence height.
Right.
In the form of like lattice or some sort of material that would not be just panel. That's mostly it. The rest of it's just kind of descriptive pictures of stuff that already existed. And then it always gives the planning commission the ability to review and permit higher fences if there's, let's say someone applied for a special use permit and they're like, we're gonna have a outdoor grease trap. We want to screen it with something other than a 6-foot or 7-foot fence. Like it gives them the ability to kind of have some kind of leeway on what they wanna approve for like vegetative screening or fencing materials. So yeah, it's not a ton of change, it's really just kind of a clarification on materials, locations. I mean, it doesn't really take anything out, it just kind of adds more definitive language to what we have.
So Stephen, are you saying, I'm looking at this, so on side lawns, between two homes, the fence can't be higher than 4 feet, correct?
No, so this is a corner lot. So this is this
Oh.
image is a corner lot,
Oh,
that's
I
why
see.
we intentionally put the sidewalk.
Okay.
So what we had was, before in the code, there was a lot of, it wasn't clearly defined that you couldn't put a 7-foot fence up to the front facade of the house.
Okay.
Depending on how you read it, you could make the argument that a 7-foot fence could go to the front, basically the front facade line. And if you go around town, you'll see people did that.
Yeah.
And there was really, the language was not super clear on whether that was permitted or not. So what this has done is it's adding a picture with an arrow that says, no, this is specifically what we're talking about when we say the back corner, to keep us from getting, you can see one right now on, what is that, Ford, where we've got like a 7-foot fence that runs,
Ford and Walnut.
Yeah.
yeah. So we're trying to get, and there's actually one on Spruce too that's flush with the front of the house that screen, basically goes an entire side lawn.
So the picture also on the next page there
Yes,
also is a corner lot.
right.
Okay.
So this is basically to illustrate that idea that this is a rear lawn, this is a side lawn.
Yeah.
So we can get away from like I said, like we don't want 7-foot stockade fencing running, kind of fortifying around.
Well, this also goes along with the corner lot, that technically they have 2 front lawns too.
They don't. So that's what this would define that. It's basically saying you don't have 2 front lawns, you have a side lawn. What we're saying is side lawns are not fenced like rear lawns. Side lawns are their own thing, front lawns are their own thing.
Okay, well, that's what I was saying. So
Yep.
side lawns, you cannot have a 6-foot fence.
Yep. That's exactly what we're saying.
Oh,
Unless it's in a back, like rear lawns,
right.
if you're not on a corner, if you're not on a right of way, you could theoretically put a fence up, but it would still have to come to the corner of the rear of your house.
Okay.
So like, for example, my house, I couldn't run a 7-foot fence up to my front door and say, well, this is, even though it's not on a public right of way, I can still fence in. We're saying the back corner of your house is where you can put your privacy fence. The side lawn of your house is not,
Unless you get a variance.
unless you get a variance.
Okay, now I have 2 questions.
Mhm.
Actually, maybe it's just one question. The house that you mentioned on the corner of Walnut and Ford,
Mm-hmm.
that fence is too tall, for sure. Like, it's taller than 7 feet anyway. But 2 things. Where the fence is technically that property owner's backyard. But they can't put the fence up against the back of their house because of where their driveway is located.
Right, you'd have to come up with you'd have to figure it out. I mean, that's,
So he would only be allowed to have the 4-foot fence along the sidewalk.
Unless you apply for a special use permit.
yeah, variance.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to do is
I just
limit the
wanna
number of
understand
like barricade fences that we have floating around town.
Right. There's a house at the corner of Spruce and, ID Court. That's a really good example of like correctly fencing. They have the side fence and then the taller back fence.
There's one on Walnut, like, you can do it, you just have to think about
Understand
it
it,
before
yeah.
you do it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's really the only clarifying element in this section of code. It clarifies where the heights can be, and it also just adds the material lists, cause you guys were like, you know, we've defined permanent by being like, these are the materials we permit. And it adds that ability to add some screening above the panel height.
Cool.
Thank you for the clarifications here and now.
And like I said, it mirrors a code that we've already adopted, basically. The MU1 code, this is just basically an amendment to that form code that we already have downtown. So ideally what we would be doing is, we would theoretically pull that section of code out of MU1 and just be like, this is the code for the whole city.
Yeah, that makes sense.
To clarify something, somebody approached me about something related, and it seems like the appropriate place. They were talking about, for example, deer fencing in the backyard. Let's just say in this example here that we've been looking at, 7-foot fence on the side, or even a 6-foot fence on the side, and then an enclosure around a garden that might have deer fencing that goes up 10 foot.
I don't wanna be the guy that says we're probably never gonna know about that, but like, that's not what we're looking for.
And that's what I explained, is I thought that the fence had more to do with the property line fencing
Yes.
and the kind of how it impacts the neighbors as much as it was.
If we got a call that someone had constructed like a pallet fortress 20-foot high tower in their backyard, we would go look at it.
Right.
If someone has bamboo stakes with 12-foot plastic deer fencing around it, we're probably never gonna hear about it, we're probably never gonna see it.
Right, okay.
That's kind of one of those things where like, we wouldn't consider those structures permanent, I'm gonna use the example of like, you know it when you see it. Like, you know what the intent of something is when you see it. If I can look at it and say that is clearly junk, that is defined as junk in our code, you've got 17 tires, old gas cans, pallet wood, all kind of stacked in a weird precarious Jenga around stuff, I'm gonna say that's junk. Fenced in garden that no one can see, that's in a rear yard, that doesn't require permitting, that is not, it would take a lot for that to turn into something we would investigate or file some sort of complaint on. And we honestly, like, we don't see it. We've never received that complaint before, so I guess I could put it that. We've never received a complaint about deer fencing around a garden in a backyard. What we do receive complaints about are fences.
Right.
So like, if we start getting a slew of complaints about excessively tall garden fencing, then we would have to probably come up with some way to better clarify what that would be. Arguably, I would just say you could probably just make a 7-foot high deer fenced garden that has like something draped over the top of it, and you'd probably be fine. So yeah, I guess long story, like, we aren't getting those complaints, so we would have to respond to that if we ever did.
Okay.
So that's just, if we don't know, we don't know.
Okay, fair enough, thank you. Any other questions for Stephen?
Yes. So the additional 1 foot of height with the see-through area, is that on all fences, front and back?
No, it says rear. It's only for rear.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yeah, in rear lawns. Okay.
Because a 4-foot fence with 1 foot on it of screening is not gonna do you any good.
Right. Yeah. No, I just misread it because I read an additional 1 foot of height may be added, but then it's the next sentence that says that you can have the screening element.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I think it's great.
Ed?
Good.
Are you good?
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah, I think it's great.
Thanks again, this is good clarifying. So, to understand now, we bring this forward to council, so this has to be laid on the desk as it changes, or what's the threshold for that?
Probably what'll happen is I'll just run it through just for like proofreading, just to make sure there's not like a misspelling in it or something. And then, yeah, we just go to council.
Okay.
Cool.
Sounds good. Appreciate it. All right, so next is the shopping cart ordinance.
No pictures on this one.
It's not especially interesting here.
Pretty boring.
So any questions about this?
No, I read through it, it seems pretty straightforward and is what we were talking about the last meeting.
We basically modeled this off of a couple codes that exist. The only big change that we had that I discussed with Dave Merzig about, we would essentially notify the owner of the cart that, hey, we have a cart. We would have to store it for 5 days, which Dave Merzig was like, you can store it however you want. You're not required to store it in any special, it just has to be accessible if they want to come get it. And then the section that we have that's a little different, a lot of these municipalities are trying to auction these carts, which Dave thought was kind of
Waste of time.
kind of a waste. So we would notify not certified, we would just send them a letter. Within 5 days, if they don't pick up their cart, we throw it in the scrap pile and we bill them 50%, the cost plus 50%. So whatever it costs us to have a guy throw it into the scrap pile, hourly rate, including fringe, plus 50%, which is how we process everything. So we come up with it ends up being about $125 a pop.
So if they're outside the city limits, we're going to fine them, but they're probably not gonna pay the fine, right?
Yeah, theoretically they wouldn't have to pay the fine, but we could take them to court and try to get it. I mean, if we logged in $28,000 of carts over time.
Right.
But yeah, so any carts we found in the city that are outside of the city, obviously we don't have the ability to levy tax, like fees, like administrative fees. But it does address the ones that we have that are in the city.
So when Lieutenant Berger was here, you guys were mentioning that part of the goal for this ordinance is to allow the police to also ticket?
Yeah, so what it says is, this ordinance basically says it's unlawful for you to take carts off of property, like Dollar General. So the person with the cart would theoretically be in violation of the law by having the cart off the property that's owned by Dollar General.
Okay.
Obviously, like the kind of the weird part you run into is like they're not all Dollar General carts. So I'm just using that as an example because that's the one that's kind of here. But theoretically, if you're pushing an Aldi's cart across the Lettuce Highway, or you're pushing you would be in violation of the law, the city ordinance.
Or you return it afterwards.
It's up to the cops. They would be the ones writing those tickets, not me.
Okay.
Sounds like we need a shopping cart district. I'm only half joking.
So basically what this would do, it says is that if you have the cart, if you're pushing it around town, you're technically in violation of the code. If you leave it somewhere and I get it, then we're gonna send a letter to the owner of the cart that says, hey, you got 5 days to come get your cart. If you don't get it, we're gonna throw it in the scrap pile.
So when I read that initially, I felt like 5 days was pretty short, but I was thinking that this is gonna be, people who own carts, not like Aldi. And so is part of the reason for the 5 days because you had mentioned that generally they don't want them back?
Generally, they don't want them back. 2, we don't want to have to store them. And 3, like we might notify someone via email. Like if Dollar General says email us, we'll email them and say, hey, we have a cart. If we have a contact person that we can call, we'll say, hey, we have a cart.
Okay.
So what it's like, we would mail a letter because we typically will mail a paper copy of everything we send. But if we call up Dollar General and say, hey, we got 4 of your carts down here, you might want to get them. You have 5 days.
Okay.
Because part of it is we don't want to have to store carts.
That makes sense. Yeah, I just wanted to understand where that time frame came from.
Some of the other communities use like a 14-day period. But like our DPW is like, we don't want to store carts for 14 days.
Sure.
We also run into where like we find carts that no one knows who owns them. So we're like, well, what do we do with these? So part of this ordinance says if there's not a tag on it identifying where it's from, we just immediately scrap it.
Right.
Because if we can't figure out who owns it, we can't figure out whose property it is, we can't contact them to let them know that we have their cart. The idea is to remove carts and not create a ton of administrative processes, because as of now, with no cart ordinance, if we find carts, we just kind of just dump them. So this would add a process that we aren't currently really doing.
Okay.
Dave, Brad? Questions?
The only thing I would say, I mean, I was only, as I said, I was only half joking about the shopping cart district, similar to, well, water district or a fire district. I mean, in theory, if we had one, if this became a huge problem where we had like hundreds of carts being left in the city, and we established that, then we would be able to bill or fine let's say we call up Aldi's and said, we have 20 of your carts over here, come and get them, or we're gonna scrap them, and they don't, then we could potentially charge them and put it up and levy taxes against them,
It's,
correct?
yeah, so it's really interesting, like, if you look, I've read in a short period of time, I've digested hundreds of shopping cart ordinances from across the country. And if you look at some places like, some municipalities in like California and some municipalities in like Arizona have actually started requiring all places that have shopping carts to install the Aldi quarter thing. They've also required them to start installing the magnetic push strips that won't let the cart roll. You can't physically push the cart out of a parking lot.
Whoa.
Yeah, like there is some crazy shopping cart ordinances that exist now.
So we need the county to do that, so we don't get the ones from south side in the middle of the city.
Well, so that's what it's come down. Like some of these shopping cart ordinances literally require businesses to install shopping cart like anti-theft mechanisms, essentially. But that would be pretty tricky to.
Well, I don't think we're all, I don't think
It's-
we're there yet.
No.
with The number of
No,
carts
no,
that
no.
are distributed.
So that's why I kind of erred on the easier to enforce. If we find a shopping cart, if we can identify who owns it, we'll give them a call, we'll send them a letter, come get your shopping cart. If you don't, in 5 days, we're gonna scrap it.
I'm okay with this.
It basically mirrors the same process we use for snow removal, lawn mowing, garbage pickup. It's mirroring a function we're already kind of doing,
Right.
which makes it easy to execute. Because it's not anything new. It doesn't change what we're really, instead of mowing a lawn, we'd be moving a shopping cart.
It's codifying in code what we already do.
It's adding shopping carts to the already list of things we're doing under our offices, cutting grass, clearing snow, picking up garbage, those already existing functions.
Right.
I just read one thing, cause when you said that thing about the strips, I was thinking of places I've been that have had the, like, really strict, and I never really noticed it, but then you kind of think, like, oh yeah, you literally can't take a cart out of the parking lot. One of the things that I just read that I think might be worth considering, like, maybe we don't wanna get that serious to require, certain anti-theft things, but this says, mandatory locking of carts after hours. Carts stored outdoors shall be locked after business hours in a manner that prevents theft.
So what we're running into is like, the carts that we're getting in the city are being taken they're not being taken at night.
Okay.
They're being like, people are buying stuff, they're pushing them off, and then they're just dumping them in a lawn or leaving them in the street, or they're not like, it's not like a midnight raid. It's mostly just people pushing shopping carts and then ditching them. But yeah, that is something that I saw a lot of ordinances have. We just don't have a lot of businesses that have shopping carts, basically, and the ones that do are storing them inside anyway.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, Walgreens has them and Rite Aid has them. That was, I think, brought up after our last meeting.
Yep. And
That
Dollar
I never
General.
really realized, and Dollar General.
But they keep them
Maybe that's
inside.
the only one. Are Dollar Generals inside?
Yep.
Okay.
So most of those businesses are storing them inside anyway because they don't have enough space in the parking lot to store them.
Okay.
Walmart, like, they store them inside. Most of these places are already storing these things inside,
Okay.
and most of these carts are popping up because people are using them. They're pushing them across. They're like, I'm not gonna push this back to Walmart. I'm not gonna push this
Right.
4 blocks back to Walgreens, so they just ditch them, and that's kind of what we're seeing.
Everyone good?
Yes.
Okay. vacant building plan?
I did. So this was brought up to me, a couple of different buildings, in question by residents. Just kind of wanting to understand, like, what the requirements are for vacant buildings. And, yeah, do we feel like, well, okay, I guess what I wanna understand before we look at this is like, do we know, you probably do know, how many vacant properties there are in the city?
So we know how many vacant properties are registered in the city.
Right.
We have some vacant properties that we know exist that are not registered or are technically. So like right now, we have college rental units that are vacant. If we said, are these properties vacant, like this ordinance means vacant? No, they're just unrented. They're just uninhabited. So what we run into is we have a very good idea of how many vacants that meet this definition there are in Oneonta.
Okay.
That number fluctuates between, I'd say in the time I've been here, we've gone between like 70 and maybe 100
Okay.
that we know are, meet the definition, definitely are vacant properties.
Okay. But it's probably more than that. That meet vacant under a broader definition.
Yeah, so like there are many properties in the city that are literally just uninhabited.
Right.
The owner's like, I just didn't rent to someone, I didn't sign a lease. So you kind of get into a weird world where like we don't typically make people that are actively seeking tenants register as vacant properties.
Right.
We don't make properties that have building permits register as vacant properties. So if you're
Right.
like, I own a house, I have a building permit, I'm doing construction work on it, there's exemptions in the code for, if it's actively marketed for sale, they don't have to register as vacant. Cause the idea is we don't wanna impose a fee on people who are attempting to sell a house, attempting to occupy a house, attempting to fix a house. So we have properties that are technically vacant, that are technically up for sale. So they're not listed as vacant. 40 River Street would be an example of that. It was a vacant house, it was registered as vacant, they had to pay a vacant property fee. They put it up for sale, it's no longer considered vacant under our ordinance. Yeah, so that's generally how that works.
Okay. I guess the next thing I wanna try to understand is what the intent of this code is. Is it to discourage vacant properties? Is it simply to have a list?
So there's a fee attached to this that goes up to $2,500 a year. So the idea is that if you sit with a vacant property, you're adding a $2,500 bill to your tax bill every year. So the idea behind that is that you become motivated to either sell that property or occupy that property because you don't want to pay the increasing fee that is associated with sitting on a vacant property.
Okay. Do you feel like that's working as intended?
It's a mixed bag. So what ends up happening is people that come upon vacant properties, that will impact. So people that are like, I bought a property, I got in over my head, I just need to get rid of it. That fee becomes a real pressure point for them.
Okay.
Corporate banks, no,
Don't care.
they don't care. For the most part, corporate banks or like mortgage companies or lending, like foreclosure companies, they're not sweating the 20, they don't know where Oneonta is.
Right.
But this came of, I remember having these discussions, and part of this came from properties like that that are owned by a corporate bank, but also we had some other properties, and we may still do, that people bought that don't live here with intentions to use them, or to move in, or to rent it or not, and it just became an issue where they, for whatever reason, they weren't able to fix the house to make it habitable, and they just let it sit. And this went on for year after year after
Mhm.
year. There's a property on Cedar Street
Yeah,
that's like that, and
So 38 Cedar is a great example of a property that was purchased, it was left vacant. They've been paying the vacant property fee. What we ended up doing is writing them about 30 code violation tickets, and they're in court right now. So code violations, those tickets are up to $1,000 a day per violation, per day of violation.
Wow.
So we have them on the hook for probably, I think it's like close to like 20 property maintenance violations. So on top of the vacant property fee, we've also got them actively like in court in front of the judge.
So it sounds like it's not perfect, but we're at least, it gives us one of many tools to put pressure on the owners.
Yeah.
And we're also able to,
So the full intent of this code is that we would have a fire inspector doing annual inspections on these properties. We just don't have the staff. I mean,
Okay.
we are understaffed right now. And that is one of those things that if we're picking between doing fire inspections on buildings that are occupied by people, that are businesses, that are, you know, bars, restaurants, that is where we're putting the man hours, not into making sure that 50 Elm Street, you know, is up to code when it comes to fire safety. Most of our vacant buildings are like single family or two family residential structures, so they're not a high hazard category to begin with. They're more of a nuisance property issue than they are anything else. One option that we would have is to, and this is kind of a direction we went with a couple of them, is we get court, similar to what we did with the townhouse, we get court convictions, and then we take them as, public nuisances, and we get orders to make corrections on the property. But that's a court process, so it takes a lot of time.
Right.
So in a perfect world, what we would have is a fire inspector who was, because in our ordinance it says they're required to do annual inspections.
Yeah,
We're getting to maybe half of them.
okay,
Just because we have a 1 day a week, if he's not on shift, fire inspector who is also working in the fire department. So it's,
wow, okay,
So if you have a vacant house with, stuff piled up on the front porch where it looks like a salvage yard, that's a code violation, isn't it?
Yep.
And if the backyard's the same,
Sure.
I'm thinking of that property across the street from Fox Hospital.
Shell Medicines, yep. Yeah, so he was given a vacant property fee. He was given additional time to clean up that mess by the Board of Public Service. I don't see where he's done that. So that is an example of a property that is a code violation. Again, it's one of those, you gotta be kind of whack-a-mole, you hit them when you can. I mean, there's a lot of them.
yeah.
But yeah, that's an example, those are code violations, and that is a vacant house.
I think before we passed, I mean, would it be fair to say before we passed that, we had the law, but we didn't have the teeth to it necessarily?
Yeah, so this code expanded on an earlier ordinance that we had. This added the requirement for turning off utilities, it added the requirement for annual fire inspections, so it added things to an existing ordinance. That has been successful. We contact NICEAG regularly, we turn utilities off, we get these properties weatherized. That is something that we do pretty much on every one of them. The annual fire inspections, we're right now just doing exterior inspections because we just don't have the ability to get inside every one of them.
Okay. So it sounds like all the criteria are there to be able to enforce this. It's just a matter of whether or not we're able to.
The problem we run into is you have a lot of corporate banks that, for whatever reason, just sit on these properties.
Okay,
And I don't know, most of our vacants are not owned by normal people. They're not like me or you, or they're
interesting.
like First Bank of America somewhere in El Paso, Texas.
Okay,
And what they do is almost monthly sometimes, they rotate through foreclosure servicing companies. So what'll end up happening is you'll be in communication with, you know, property service company number one, and then 2 weeks later, you'll get this property's been taken over by property service company number two. And then a month later, it's number three, and then it's back to number one. So there's a constant kind of loop of random maintenance companies that get kind of circled around, and they're like from Colorado, they're from, you know, Alabama. They're not, it's not like a company in Milford that you can call on the phone and say, hey, your property's been broken into. So like if you go to 8 High Street right now, like that's a vacant. The city secured it. Like the reason it's plywooded up is we did it. 3 Hill Place, we secured it. So we actually will do those processes. If we can't get a hold of the property management company, we'll do that and bill them back for it.
At 1.5.
Yeah. So like for example, like 8 High Street, I had to do because we didn't have a DPW worker. So we billed them at whatever my rate plus fringe is, and then add. So it's pretty handy process. Not the best use of my time, but it's, you know, it's a lot of fun to get out of the office sometimes.
I have one, I think, final question, and it's about this sentence here, which says, incomplete registration. Failure to provide a vacant building plan results in incomplete registration. But it seems like kind of a hanging chad, like there's no real, anywhere else in the code that I can see, there's no real explanation of what the consequences for an incomplete registration are.
We have an administrative fee process. So if you don't file a complete registration, you're billed $250 a day the first day, and then it's $10 a day every day thereafter. And we automatically bill you for the vacant property fee.
Okay.
So what that turns into is you're essentially doubling the fee by not completing the registration form.
Okay, cool.
So we have properties that end up having like almost $5,000 in an added tax levy
Wow.
just for not filling out a form.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to answer my questions about this.
And I think what we're gonna do is, once we get through 38 Cedar, we'll start, it's kinda like once you make that first kind of inroad, you can see like how the court will move these. So 38 Cedar is an easy test drive because it is, they are individuals that own the property. We know where they are, and we could ticket them and drag them into court. So if the court decides that they're gonna say, yeah, it's a $60,000 fine, which he could do, we'll just use that same thing. We'll not only make people register, but we'll start ticketing for, you know, every time we mow your lawn, we write you a ticket. Every time we shovel your sidewalk, we write you a ticket. Every time so like with 38 Cedar, every time we've mowed their lawn this summer, which is like 8 times, we've written them a ticket. Every time we've done anything at their property, we've also ticketed them as well as issuing the violation or correcting.
Do they actually see the ticket? Because I know the ticket's issued, the county gets it, the county makes us whole, and then they add it onto their taxes.
No. So the violation, if we remedy, they're sent an invoice. If they don't pay the invoice, it goes to the county and it's billed. Tickets are a separate process that goes through the city court.
Okay.
So a ticket has fines attached to it, remedies have fees attached.
Okay.
Fees are locked into the taxes, fines are a separate process that's through the criminal court system.
Okay, I think you've explained this to me in the past too, so thank you.
So when the people that own 38 Cedar are getting tickets for fines, those are decided by the court. My administrative fee process is just through the county tax system. So it's kind of like doubling, like they're getting both sides of it.
Right.
Okay,
You-
I feel
you-
complete, yeah, thank
Alright,
you.
And you said that you thought there might be some further research, but you feel like this is.
Yeah, I feel like I understand it
Okay.
well enough, yeah.
Ed, you good?
Yeah, I've been pretty familiar with this, and this is the second or third iteration of
Yes.
vacant building legislation since around 2011 or 2012, when we first started
Actually, I'll tell you a funny story about one of those. I accidentally tore one of them down, and the bank just sent us a check for $55,000. Like that's how crazy it is. We sent them a bill for a demolition on a house, and they just sent us a check. That's how wild. I mean, that's how out of touch some of these places are. You know, a bank in Texas just sent us a check for $55,000 to. I mean, that didn't recently happen. That happened like 6 years ago. But yeah, they mailed us a check. They were like, here you go.
We could have put a down payment on a bulldozer and gone and knocked a few other ones down.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
So I mean, that's just how kind of, like, I can't fathom that, but that's how some of these places work. I mean,
Yeah.
the city tore down a house and they sent us a check for $55,000.
So you mentioned, is it 50 Elm on the corner of Center? And
So
Elm?
50 Elm is owned by the land bank. So
Oh,
if I
okay.
can plug that, 50 Elm and 62 Elm are both for sale. If you know someone who wants to buy a house,
Oh,
have them
okay.
call me.
Okay, good to know.
I am not selling it personally, but the land bank is trying to sell those two properties. So if someone's like, I need a starter home and I can do some work on it, those two properties are available for sale.
Cool. Yeah, that's one of the properties that kind of prompted this discussion, because that's been vacant for like 20 years, and
Yep.
I see DPW go and mow the lawn, you know, and I'm thinking to myself, they have to be racking up fees.
The problem with that house is the owner actually is totally gone. We have no idea. So prior to the land bank taking that property,
Uh-huh.
we had no idea who owned it.
Huh.
It literally, there was just no one.
But no, so like no one was paying taxes on it?
Over the last 3 years. Well, no, because of COVID, we couldn't repossess. So like, yeah, over the last like 5 years, it just.
Okay.
So the land bank took that, and we are actively trying to find someone that wants to buy it and fix it up. So
That would
if
be
you
awesome.
know someone, have them call me.
Okay.
So is the land bank also looking at other properties and trying to, I mean, I remember the conversation, I think, I don't know, 3.5 years ago when we first started, about the land bank taking over some of these zombie properties and.
So the land bank, the way the land bank functions is, they are looking for properties to be transferred to them at no cost. And the easiest way to do that is through the county auction. So the way that 50 Elm and 62 Elm became to the land bank was the land bank took them from the county instead of them being auctioned. Subsequently, we have had no one try to buy those two houses, but I don't know how great we are at marketing them, to be honest, but if anyone wants to buy them, have them call me. I've shown them to a couple people. 50 Elm is like okay, 62 is a major project. It would be a big project for
It
someone.
would look amazing when it's done.
Yeah, I mean, I would totally do it, but my wife was like, I'll divorce you, so.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are both for sale. So technically those are vacant again, but we're not billing the land bank a vacant property fee, because we're trying to get those back into some sort of use.
And then, this is kind of a curiosity question, nothing to do with this, but linked. Do you have a sense on, so those tax sales, I mean, I think one of the ones you referred to was a tax sale a number of years ago.
Yes.
Do you have any sense on the success in those? And what I mean by success is that a new owner takes over and begins to occupy it the way we would like, or rent it, whatever it might be.
The problem with the tax auctions is usually those properties are for sale for a reason. And typically the people buying those properties are doing it because they think they're getting a really good deal. I would not say that I've seen I've seen some of those properties bought and sold and improved, but they're typically not being bought by like a young family who's moving to Oneonta. They're usually going to people who are buying them as part of a real estate portfolio that are fixing them up into college, rentals. Like they're typically not being purchased by like just people that are looking to buy a house.
Right.
Part of the issue with the tax auction is there's a possibility that those may no longer occur because there's been some upper level courts have found that those are unconstitutional, and we might no longer be having those types of auctions. So that could be a real change to the way the county deals with tax foreclosures. I think it was in Minnesota, they decided that if a county forecloses on a property and they sell it and they make more money than they're owed in taxes, they're obligated to give that balance to the former owner. So that,
Interesting.
yeah, there's a whole, it was a whole thing that's really kind of maybe changing the way that those types of auctions occur.
Right.
But that's down the road.
Thanks. All right, I assume we have no more questions. Thanks for
No, that's
the
great.
explanation on that, as well as the others. Dave, I know that you wanted to add something to the agenda, and if you have anything else as well, maybe you too, certainly you can do so as well, but go ahead, Dave.
Okay. This was brought up to me by somebody a few weeks ago, and I didn't really do anything with it yet until I figured, you know what, I should bring it to this committee. Partly because I thought about it years ago, and I'd bring it up, and then I'd get an answer, and then I'd bring it up a few years later and get the same answer. It's basically about our ethics board. And when I noticed, back when we were working on the charter, that the ethics board was not in the charter, but it was in the code, and that we are supposed to have a board of ethics. And if you look in the code under, where is it here? It's chapter 21, article 2, 21-7, established. This is hereby established a board. There is hereby established a board of ethics consisting of 3 members to be appointed by the mayor, and who shall serve without compensation and at the pleasure of the mayor. A majority of such members shall be persons other than officers or employees of the city of Oneonta, but shall include at least 1 member who is an elected or appointed officer or employee of the city of Oneonta. And then it goes on talking about the powers and duties and so on. And I remember years ago I asked one of the mayors, it was either Dick Miller or it was Kim Muller, I think it might have been Kim. I asked why we don't have this filled, and she said, well, it was either she or somebody else said, the reason we don't have it filled is if there's an issue, then we fill it. And I'm like, okay, all right, that sort of makes sense. And then I asked again a few years later, same answer, different person, same answer. And then when somebody brought this up to me a few weeks ago, I started thinking, wait a second. If you, let's say there's an issue that comes up where you need a board of ethics. And the whole purpose of the board of ethics is for the employees, if there's an issue with an employee, if there's an issue with a mayor or a council member or some other officer here, in any direction, then you can bring it to the board of ethics. So, but then I started thinking, okay, let's say you have an issue that comes up, and there's nobody on the board. You're relying on the mayor to appoint people to the board, but which could take a long time. But then on top of that, which really got me thinking I need to bring this here, is you have the issue, and then the mayor is appointing people. There's going to be whether you're on one side of the issue or on the other side of the issue, it's going to give the appearance of potential to not be an objective pick. And I'm not saying this in any way to denigrate our current mayor. I'm just saying that could give the impression of people on the board appointed for a certain reason, to either dismiss the issue or to say, you know what, yeah, that is an issue. Fair or not, I think that people on either side are going to point fingers that way. So I'm thinking that we should review this article, the Article 2 Board of Ethics, see if there's any tweaking that needs to be done. It's possible that that it could need something, but I kind of doubt it. And then present our case to the mayor to appoint Because if you don't have it, and there is an issue, that's the other thing, people are gonna say, well, why do I bring this forward, there's no board of ethics, there's nobody on the board of ethics anyway, we're gonna rely on the mayor to appoint. Maybe there's a transition at the time between a mayor that's coming out of office and you have a new mayor that's coming into office and doesn't even learn it's gonna take a long time to learn the ins and outs of the job. If you have a board of ethics that's established, you don't have to worry about that. So, there, I stated my case.
To clarify, you have it right in front of you, does it state, is there a term that the board members serve? Obviously, the elected, does it say?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer to that, because Article 2 is short, it's 2 paragraphs. There's other issues about standards of conduct for municipal officers and employees, under definitions. But Article 1 is standards of conduct for code of ethics, under the code of ethics. So it's really short. This is coming from the Article 18 of the General Municipal Law, which is significantly longer. And I started to read this before I came here, and I realized that I needed a lot more time to read this than I had. So maybe what we should do is take the time to read through this a little bit, and that may give the answer to that, but I just don't know.
So I think your recommendation to review it and then to, I think understand what you might want to look at, is there some best practices that need to be added into this or not?
We have a meeting in here.
Or, what needs to be done, I think is good. If it's making a recommendation, maybe it's also, maybe that the code is fine, or the way it's written in the code is fine, and we just need to have a process attached to it.
Can I read one thing here from, that I thought was, it sort of solidified what I thought I should bring this forward also, is under Article 18. It's introduction to Article 18 of the General Municipal Law is the principal state statute governing conflicts of interest on the part of municipal officers and employees. An understanding of Article 18 is important because violations of the statute can result in civil and criminal sanctions, undermine public confidence in local government administration, and damage reputations. Thus, the purpose of this document is to describe and explain the provisions of Article 18. And then the one paragraph of history of Article 18 is that it was enacted in 1964 and it can be described fairly as nothing less than an effort to bring order out of chaos. Prior to the enactment of Article 18, conflicts of interest on the part of local government officials were governed by the common law, at least a dozen state statutes and several dozen city charter provisions, and by a large number of administrative and judicial decisions interpreting both the common law and these various statutes and charter provisions. Indeed, when enacting Article 18, the legislature found that existing law is too complex, too inconsistent, too overgrown with exceptions, and that basic concepts must be retained, but something more than recodification is needed. So the legislature further noted that the real conflict must be rooted out without condemning the inconsequential. So anyway, I think it's something that we could address, and maybe it might be just really simply going to the mayor and saying, this is why we feel this is necessary, if we all feel it's important. We feel this is important that this be filled.
So we should review Article 18 between now and our next meeting and discuss it then?
I think, yeah, as best as we can. It's pretty long, but at the very least, review Article 2 and Article 1 and 2 of Chapter 21 of our code, and that's like a 10-minute read.
Yeah.
It's pretty short.
Yeah, I think, let's get informed, appreciate you bringing this to us, it sounds like this is something we need to at least examine and make sure that we are practicing this or implementing it the way that we should be, or the proper way. I think just the talking points that you brought up here yeah, a bit of a concern, right? We don't want it to appear arbitrary or capricious, that the mayor is then appointing people after something has arisen. So I think to have something in place seems to make good sense. So let's read it all over and make sure that we're all kind of comfortable with whatever recommendations we might want to make. Again, maybe it's more of that a process needs to be attached to this, that's just not defined here in this code. And, you know, and then have that conversation with the mayor, and I think that would be, you know, at least some good steps to, you know, clarifying something that we have is really gray and fuzzy right now.
My hope is that this would be a simple conversation that we just need to have, and that's about it. I think Dave Merzig could probably clarify some questions too. And I'm sure this has not been on the radar of the mayor. There's a lot of other things that the mayor's had to deal with, and, but I think that it would prevent headaches later, or potential headaches later.
Well, and I guess my thinking is that if a mayor, not even the mayor here, but a
Right.
mayor at any point appoints this group, and let's say they have a 3 or 4 year appointment, whatever it might be, and that group sits idle for 4 years, and so be it. But as the public health officer has said to us in the past, that was kind of something that was an idle position for most of the way, until it wasn't,
Right.
with the pandemic. And, you know, of course, you don't ever hope that we never have to have an ethics issue brought before an ethics board, but at some point there might have to be.
It's good to know that it's
Right, that it's there and
It's
exists.
there.
Right.
so.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Forgive me, Article 1 and 2 of what section?
21, I think.
Yeah, chapter 21 in the code.
Got it, thank you.
So good, let's put this on our agenda for next meeting to, you know, to give us all the opportunity to kind of read it over a little more thoroughly and then have a discussion and see which direction we go in. But it seems like there's a logical direction that might make sense, but let's see if that confirms what everyone's thinking. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
One question that comes to my mind every time this subject comes up is, what if the mayor is the person that is subject of the inquiry?
Right.
Right.
That's a good point, because then the mayor's the only one that can establish it.
Well, but
Or no,
pre-established.
actually it's pre-established.
Right,
The
exactly.
mayor's the only one that can fill it. Right.
And so that speaks to why this should be, you know, codified some type of way, because exactly, it's pre-filled, there's no, it's not pre-filling with because I'm gonna be dealing with this next week, right? This is pre-filled, it sits there for however length of time, and then if something were to come up, it's not arbitrary at that point, it's already been filled. So I think there's an argument for that, right?
Yeah.
Good.
Cool.
Any other concerns to be brought forward?
Not today.
All right, well.
Thank you.
I'll see. I don't have the gavel. Thanks,
See,
everybody.
same time next month.